culture or individual heritage is probably the most determinant factor when creating your own house style. To date, I am the only American to have worked and cut on Savile Row. So I bring something different than most of my peers. Tailors have made up the rules for the last 200-300 years, and there were rule breakers within that timeline. We should know that we have the ability to wear clothes how we want, especially now. We are more accepting of individuality now than we ever have been.
Welcome back to the Gentleman's Gazette. We're here with Matt Gonzalez.
Good to see you. How are you?
Excellent. Thank you for being here. And we're at the Arterton Lounge. So do you meet customers here sometimes?
I do, yeah. So I do all of my fittings here, with the exception of the few clients that prefer me to visit their own homes or offices. And then all the cutting is done next door. I do some of the sewing next door, but most of everything that is made within about 1 kilometer of here. So I have coat makers in Savile Row, trouser makers in Soho.
Just over half a mile.
Yeah, very good point, yeah.
But Matt, you're originally from the U.S.
So yeah, I was born and raised in Long Beach, California, so just south of Los Angeles. And I didn't move to London until I was 21.
But in the meantime, as a custom tailor, you've had experiences at Tom Sweeney, Dunhill, Huntsman. Now you're out on your own.
Yeah.
So you've seen quite a bit.
I've been really fortunate, actually. I would not have dreamed of being able to work for some of the places that I have been able to before I moved to London. I've been very lucky in that regard to just see such a diverse range of house styles, of construction techniques, and also how different businesses operate within our industry.
Which brings us to the topic of today's video. We're going to talk about house styles, how you find a house style, how you find a tailor that maybe suits your style. And it's an interesting topic because sometimes I remember, I was in Hong Kong once and you say, hey, what's your house style? And they're like, we do whatever you want. And that can be overwhelming because sometimes with Bespoke, it's a new thing that's created and it's hard to imagine what it's going to look like. But if there is a specific house style, you can look at it and see what you see is what you get kind of thing.
Exactly. It helps kind of ground your own sense of style. I mean, it would be very weird if you went to a car dealership and they said, oh, we can do anything, any style you want, any design, we'll make it right now. You go to Ferrari for a reason. You go to Bentley for a reason. You go to Mercedes for a reason. And the same really applies to tailoring. And one of, I think, the interesting elements of our conversation today is that most people think of Savile Row as these long established houses with rich traditions. But these newer tailors like myself are in the process, real time, creating our own house styles. And there's a variety of reasons why we choose the paths that we go down.
So, you mentioned Savile Row, and Savile Row is known for, not even just Savile Row itself, but at different houses, right? There's military influences. There's maybe a more business suit, like Emerson and Shepherd drape cut. Yeah. And you wouldn't go to them and say, hey, make me a completely unstructured Neapolitan-style jacket with pick stitching all over the place. I think the result would be odd.
Yeah. It was actually, going back to the car reference, the owner of Huntsman once told me, you wouldn't walk into Ferrari asking for a Bentley. And I think that the same applies again to tailoring. You wouldn't go to a house that is known for structure and roped shoulders and heavy canvassing and ask them for a Neapolitan jacket.
So what are the elements that you would look for, or a potential customer would look for if they want to identify the house style?
It's really a bit of research to start. You want to just go and look at what imagery those houses are putting out, read up about them. If you have the opportunity, the best thing you can do is go and shop around. When I was on Savile Row, we would have clients that would come in and say, I have an 11 o'clock appointment with you, but I have a 12 o'clock appointment with your next door neighbor and a 1 o'clock after that, and they would literally, being new clients to Bespoke, just say, I'm going to spend a day doing my research, seeing what house seems to really fit my style, seeing what culture within that house fits my personality.
So, but would you say, when you look at pictures, for example, or at mannequins, that you just look at the overall impression and see if you like that? Or if you're a little more into the subject matter, would you look at the gorge height, the drape, the shoulder width, the structure, things you can see, like how stiff a garment is, for example?
Yeah.
Like, do you have like a kind of a checklist that can help people even be aware of things they may not otherwise think of?
I mean, really, we could create a checklist right now off the top of our heads, but generally speaking, because so many different types of people are going to be going to Bespoke houses, there will be different levels of knowledge and understanding. When looking at your checklist, I'd say the very first line is, does the house that you're looking at or interested in kind of ignite some kind of interest or spark within you?
Like an emotion.
Yeah. When you go to a museum, if you see a beautiful painting that everyone loves but you don't, you just don't have particular interest in that artist. You might find a different artist that somehow speaks to you on a level that you don't really realize consciously. So the same is true with style. We all like certain styles. I might like something that you don't, and vice versa is probably true. So you have to just make sure that it just ignites some kind of interest or passion.
Well, that makes sense. And I also think, if you're, let's say, Savile Row, right? If you're like in love with British style and you want something that's very traditional, I don't know, Henry Poole, you're like, I want that dinner jacket because they were the first who did that. And if you're into history, then this is a great place to start. But, you also have to realize that maybe the person you're speaking to, right? There's maybe a head cutter. There's different people involved in the garment. And you may not speak to all the people who will actually do the work. And then there are the individual craftspeople who can do something start to finish. And the only person you talk to is the person who does the entire work. And then there's the chemistry too, like there's many elements.
Oh, totally. I mean, I would say with those two examples, it's very rare now that someone does everything. Just the basic structure of our business now. It's possible, and there are a few people that do it, but generally you won't be able to speak to everyone that's involved because there are many hands that make a single bespoke suit. But you want to see a little bit of the house culture. Some people like a more formal environment. Some people want something a little bit more approachable and casual. So you are going to have a significant time investment when you commission a bespoke suit. You're going to do multiple fittings. You're going to spend, probably a total of a few hours over the 4 months that it takes to get something delivered.
Plus travel cost.
Yeah. So you want the entire process to be enjoyable. So it's not just about getting a great suit, because Savile Row, the bespoke industry, is the benchmark of quality. Mm-hmm. We wouldn't be, any of us, be a tailoring house if we couldn't deliver very high quality suits. So then you have to look at those additional elements of the process and what it means to have a suit. So is it enjoyable? Do you get on with the people that are looking after you? Do you just like being in the space?
Mm-hmm. But if we go back to the individual elements, if we were to create a checklist, starting from the top, going to the bottom, what would be the first items to look at?
So we want that that initial spark. Mm-hmm. After that, you want to look at your lifestyle, because if there's a tailor that has very kind of heavy, structured, really formal, almost military-like tailoring, you might not want to wear that if you like wearing jeans and t-shirts all day. Even if you're going to wear a suit once a year, putting on a very structured suit might not necessarily kind of comport with your own lifestyle.
And it could be even other elements, right? It could be like, oh, is it a denim shirt on a mannequin, or is it a starched front shirt? Right?
Exactly.
Like, that gives you the vibe
Yeah.
of the tailor. It could be another thing. Okay.
Yeah. So you want to make sure that there is some compatibility with your own personal style. From there, you just want to ask questions. Every tailor that I've worked with, or worked for rather, has always asked pretty much the same questions. How often do you want to wear the suit? Where are you wearing this suit? What do you like when it comes to style? Like, who do you like? Who do you think dresses well? Those kinds of questions start to eliminate the cloth options that we would show to anyone coming into our showrooms. Because we have tons of cloth. I mean, just behind the cameras over here, I have 5,000-6,000 swatches that we could go through one by one. But if I know that you're not looking for an overcoat, well, that takes away 30-40 options. If I know that you hate everything except for like a dark charcoal or a dark navy, then we're getting rid of a lot of others. If I know that you like lightweight cloths because you don't want to be weighed down, we're narrowing down. We're filtering out everything that doesn't apply to your individual circumstance.
Well, plus, and you could argue, like, how does the cloth relate to the house style? And it's in a way of, sometimes some tailors like to work with particular cloths and they do it particularly well. So then you can say, hey, if I like a lightweight, silk material, they're really good. And maybe the other one is really good with super heavy tweeds. They may even have dead stock and unusual options the other tailor might not.
Yeah.
So that's how it really relates to that house
Exactly.
style.
Yeah, and that goes into the house style and some of their heritage. And that's why Italian tailors are known for light, soft tailoring because of the climate. It's warmer, so they didn't want to wear heavy tweeds or flannels. They looked for linens and open weaves, and then they removed a lot of the canvassing. And so that fits. That house style is very organically created from the geography.
Yeah. And I think, many people look at the lapels and say, oh, I like a wider lapel or I like a skinnier lapel. What's also really important in the overall look is the gorge height and the gorge angle.
Yes. So I have a relatively square lapel. I try to keep it as high as possible, but you don't want something that's too high, just because then you can't really work the collar and it looks inelegant.
Yes.
I'm not a particular fan of a very angled gorge line. I think it's very indicative of like the 1990s, the early 90s tailoring. You'd have these really long collars with really low angled gorge lines. Like I think Bill Clinton, if you look at his old suits when he ran for president, and they just looked really droopy to me, for the lack of a better word.
Yeah. And you can, some Italian tailors have like a rounded gorge line, right? You can have a broken one like the Kniesche lapel or whatever it is. But then there's elements of like the shoulder padding, right?
Yeah.
Like, what are you going for there? Or maybe, you're a vintage enthusiast and you want that very specific 1930s look, then go with a tailor who specializes in that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because if someone comes to you and says, hey, I want a 1920s suit, what are you going to say?
I mean, if someone was absolutely dead set on getting a suit from me and wanted a 1920s style, I would, one, say, listen, this isn't what I normally do. I can try my best and I can work with you, but I would have to set their expectations at the same level of my own. Because the last thing we want to do is disappoint anyone. But 1920s really isn't where I come from in terms of my historical or kind of aesthetic inspiration. So it's not something that I cut on a daily basis.
I mean, we can get back to that later, but that's what you want to understand from the tailor. What is their mindset? What is their inspiration? Is it the 1930s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s? Is it maybe more a contemporary take?
Yeah, I mean, and it might not just be rooted within a decade. It could be in a subculture. Some people might want something that's a bit rock and roll. Some people might want something that looks very military. I mean, then you go into specific style of jackets. If you're getting a Norfolk jacket, you probably want something very tweedy and countryside. So we're not going to look at rock and roll inspirations for a Norfolk jacket.
Or maybe you want a shantung silk to say, hey, I want to intentionally mix it all up. Okay. Then the other thing is like, looking at the waist suppressions, the darts, what's their regular style? Is it extremely hourglass shape? Is it more relaxed? Is there more drape?
Yeah. And so again, that goes into what the house does best. I like a much softer, more organic line. I don't like extreme shaping just because I don't feel like it feels as comfortable for me to wear. And so the people that come to me, I think, agree with that. They want something that's just easy to throw on, that feels natural, but still has some shape.
And you just mentioned comfort, right? I think it's great. Oftentimes, when you're at a tailor's and they have a bunch of garments, sometimes there's something that may somewhat fit you, and you can try something on and just see how does it feel.
Absolutely.
How are my arms like moving around? Like I don't like garments where I feel my arm movement is roughly constricted. I go around, throw up my arm, and try to make unusual movements because to me, that's important.
Totally. I think that in my experience, and I've said this for a while now, that I have had the great privilege of having bespoke suits for many years, ever since I moved to London and worked in the industry. But it wasn't until I started my own tailoring house that I felt the most comfortable in my suits, because even though my suits were fit to me, they were often cut in a British style that was much more formal than my own house style. So I felt like I had to meet the suit halfway. I had to stand up perfectly straight and really fit into the suit that fitted me.
Interesting. So how is that process of developing your own house style then? What are all the considerations that are going into it for you?
I mean, as I said, it's really a real-time process that we're kind of right in the middle of. I looked at all the houses on Savile Row, and they have so much tradition, and they came from, being military tailors or being country estate tailors. I don't have, as a company, any of that. So I had to look introspectively about what interests me, what really is stylistically exciting, what's timeless. One of the elements of bespoke tailoring that really interested me from the outset was this idea of timelessness and multi-generational clothing that gets passed down. I know this is probably well-trodden territory, but it's one of the traditions of having the 4 buttonholes on your cuff, but only 3 of them, according to bespoke tailors, should be working, and the top one should be a sham. And the reason is so when that jacket gets passed down, if the person who inherits your jacket has longer arms, we can remove the sham button, lengthen the sleeve, and add another buttonhole at the bottom, and it looks like it was still made for them. That detail is to me, what describes the pursuit of timelessness. We try to cut things that will last 20, 30, 40 years if possible.
But there's also an approach that you may have, or a tailor has, to a suit, right? Some tailors may say, hey, I make a camo suit, or I make safari jackets, and I look around me in the world and it's changing, right? We're not seeing 3-piece pinstripe suits. We're seeing more casual garments and things that people wear. And I mean, this concept of, a bespoke suit is something very formal, might shift to something, a bespoke suit is maybe something I just wear casually. Or I only wear a jacket. I don't even ever wear a suit.
Yeah, I mean, I'm wearing separates today, you're wearing separates today, so I think that's indicative of the fact that, classic charcoal 2-piece suits are the uniform of the modern man. Doesn't really apply. I like to look at clothing that has comfort and functionality and fit. the style then is informed by all that. So when I looked at my own house style, after researching for years, I did a master's degree in the history of design, and I focused in on menswear. So I looked at all the decades of the 20th century, and I came to the conclusion that the kind of mid-century American style was the most timeless.
Interesting.
Anything before that seemed to be more costumey to the modern observer. Anything after that also seemed very costumey.
So you mean that just in relation to clothing, correct?
Some also industrial design, but yes, mainly clothing.
Okay. Yeah, because in my mind, like Art Deco is that last total style where you had, the toaster, the wallpaper, the light fixtures, your, desk accessory, your ashtray, where everything was in that uniform style. I think mid-century modern, although popular, we don't quite see that. But in terms of men's suits, it's definitely there, right?
Yeah, and I mean, you would see that in some, like architectural design, you would see that in some industrial design, but when it comes to men's suits, post-war American design has a kind of simplicity that allows the character of the individual to shine through. If you look at Jack Kennedy's suits.
Slimmer lapel.
Yeah, slimmer lapel, but also very simple in design. They, flat sleeve head, it wasn't skin tight. It was a bit fuller through the body and the chest. It was a slightly longer coat, which I would say isn't necessarily what I cut as much. I don't do particularly short, but I don't go as long as they used to.
Not like Anderson and Shepherd length. That was quite long.
Yeah, some of the Salvador tailors do a little bit longer. I try to kind of just cover the seat. That's my rule of thumb. But
so interestingly, like even, for example, I myself have a very long torso. So if you cover my seat completely, it depends, right? If I look at the side view and I try to get that perfect 50-50 angle, I'm like, for me, it will look different than for someone who has a really short torso. So do you really just go for like the bum height, or are you actually going for the proportions?
Well, we look at proportions. So there's a few technical things that I do, looking at measurements and then dividing those up, but then also taking photographs of each person's posture and then looking physically at the photograph and seeing how that would relate. So there's a lot of art that goes into it. It's not just one particular formula. And then that's what fittings are for. Because I might start with completely covering the seat, but realize we need to go up half an inch or an inch. And then we do that at the fitting.
Oftentimes when it comes to bespoke suits or garments, people talk a lot about jackets. And that's fine. They're more complex from a technical point of view, right? The way everything holds together, the canvas. A lot of the time is spent on the jacket, but I found that pants are actually something that I wear even more often than a jacket, because I always wear pants. I don't always wear a jacket. And I, have had bigger thighs. And so I always had troubles finding pants that fit me. And so maybe because of that, I just looked more into that.
Yeah.
And one thing I found is like, there's lots of details that go into a great fitting trouser. And there's also lots of style differences. Do you have a particular house style for your trousers?
So I like a single forward-facing pleat. I cut a fairly easy trouser leg over the thigh, and then I don't go particularly narrow. But for me, I think I'm wearing 17.5-inch bottoms at the moment. For reference, I'm a 41 chest and I'm about 5'10", so it's not very, very wide, but it's kind of right down the middle. I've always tried to be as neutral as possible in my design choices because, in my opinion, going for that neutrality allows longevity when it comes to your suits. When I first got into tailoring back in 2007, 2008 in London, really skinny lapels were most fashionable. But having a bespoke suit with a 1.5-inch lapel really takes away from that timelessness. I try not to necessarily go too wide or too narrow. I also look at your body. So maybe if you're incredibly tall and broad, you might need a 5-inch lapel because that will look best on you. But that doesn't mean that I would do 5-inch lapels for everyone.
So a pair of pants, like I find a rise height extremely important, and I like really high-rise trousers.
Yeah.
I think they've fallen out of favor in general, but that's certainly something to look at. Now with a bespoke, it's one thing, you can basically create the pattern and do whatever you want, but especially when it comes to like made to measure, I noticed that even though they take all your measurements, they have limitations with their patterns. And so sometimes you can only go as high up as they can go, right? And more, the system doesn't allow for more. So if that's what you want, it's really important that you understand how high can I go?
Yeah.
And do I like that feel? Is it like, do they focus on only side adjusters or belt loops? And most of the times people can do both.
Yeah, I'd say even in made to measure, having side adjusters or belt loops is pretty common. I'm wearing Dax adjusters on these trousers today just because they're a little bit more easy to wear. So that's more of a bespoke style detail that you can look for when you go to a tailor if you like it.
But it's just like building a house, If you want to, you can spend a lot of time thinking about each and every little detail of your suit or garment. Or the house style helps you just not having to make all of these decisions, knowing there is a coherent style that works well. Because sometimes when you have all the options, right, you get excited. You're like, ooh, I can have this pink lining, or I can have this like photograph lining of my dog, and then I can do this, and I can do the contrast buttonhole, and I can do the angle here, and then the overall thing looks just off.
Yeah. I mean, even when you're presented with all of those options, you're right, it can be overwhelming, but also it can be tempting to do something for the novelty of it. And I wouldn't argue that bespoke tailoring is about novelty. Maybe if you have a wardrobe with 30 bespoke suits, then yeah, go nuts, do the silly things. But because bespoke tailoring is so expensive and it takes so much time, and if you don't have the budget to have multiple bespoke suits in your wardrobe, really consider what's going to be the best investment for you. What's going to last the longest in your wardrobe and what's going to feel right to wear, not just today, but also when you're 10 years older than you are now.
So when you have other aspects of a house style, such as culture, to consider, what do you think, what role does that play?
Well, I mean, it's a really interesting element because culture or, individual heritage is probably the most determinant factor when creating your own house style. I don't have the history that Salvaro has, but I have a personal history. I think some people may know that to date I am the only American to have worked and cut on Savile Row. So I bring something different than most of my peers. And when I was forming my own tailoring house, I decided to use that as the source of inspiration.
And you also have a Mexican father,
Yeah.
Palestinian mother, right? And we all have, I have a Brazilian father, German mother, I grew up there, I live in the US. These are all influences you have.
Absolutely.
And I think you showed me a pair of, Mexican belts with, silver and gold intarsia. And they had a bit of a Western belt resemblance.
Yeah.
But they were distinctly different. And, you had a duffel bag with a more kind of tribal patterned fabric, right? So I can see this is more of your style. You also wear like denim shirts sometimes, right? So it's a very different look. And if you take those aspects into a style, that can also greatly affect them.
Well, that's absolutely true. And when I was making my own suits under my own name, I felt the freedom to really experiment. And so that's when I wanted to try how does a bespoke tailor make a Western shirt? How do we make things? How do we add elements like these vintage ranchero belts to a wardrobe that makes them stand out, but also completely unique? Because those belts are all one of one because they're vintage, that are getting new leathers put on here in England. They are elements of my history, but that are also uniquely kind of Anglo-American in the style that I'm creating.
What other aspects you think go into a house style?
So you're going to start with your overall silhouette. That's the forefront of any house style. You know, what silhouette are you trying to bring to the table? And that goes into, you know, the length of the jacket, the width of the shoulders, the structure, the width of the lapels. You know, when I said I would make a 5-inch lapel on someone's very big, that would still be in keeping with my house style because I would have certain proportions in my head. Italians often were famed for having much shorter jackets. The English were, you know, known for having much longer jackets. So already there you see those two cultural distinctions. And then how that starts to create with shoulder construction, canvassing. Those are your house styles.
Although, you know, it's funny because sometimes if you look at these old books from the 80s, right, and they talk about American style is soft and unstructured, and Italian style is like this, and you look today and you're like, well, that is not the case anymore. And you know, rules, right? There's lots of rules about.
Yes.
Oh, you know, we have the lapel buttonhole, and it's cool. There's tradition. Oftentimes, there's a history. Why do we have the buttonhole on the lapel? Because it was just flapped back, and there was a button on the other side. Over time, it disappeared, and all those things. But it gets easy to just say, oh, there's this rule, and I need to abide by it. I think today things have changed. You can wear whatever you wear, whenever you want to wear it.
Yeah, I am not a big fan of the quote-unquote rule book. I totally agree that if you are going to an event where you are wearing a uniform that is literally written down for you to follow, that's fine. Follow the rules to the letter. Or if you're going to an occasion where it's kind of like codified that, you know, if you're going to a white tie ball, well, wear an evening dress coat. It's called a white tie ball. Don't go in wearing a dinner suit. Other than that, tailors have made up the rules for the last 200-300 years. And there were rule breakers within that timeline. And so we should know that we have the ability to wear clothes how we want. Especially now. We are more accepting of individuality now than we ever have been. And so there are no absolutes that must be followed for you to kind of comport to some standard of menswear.
And there's no more, you know, white wigs or the Victorian gentleman. Like, people don't dress like Beau Brummel. We don't have the silk velvets.
Yeah.
I mean, you can have that.
Yeah.
But it's actually a lot of work. And so
Oh, totally.
Style is always fluid and it changes. And rules can be helpful to make it easier.
Yeah.
But oftentimes I think if you're really stuck on the rules, it really is more a judgment about yourself, where you say, I'm insecure, I'm not super confident in my style, and I need some rules to kind of help me along. What's your take on that?
Well, yes and no. I think the rules are a great starting off point. But knowing that we can make these decisions, it's important to remember for everyone that you don't need to religiously follow them.
Yeah.
And that, you know, and this goes back to my whole philosophy on mid-century American style. I often see, this probably happens once every year or every other year, the BBC will have some article about the kind of young couple who have decided to live their entire life like it's 1944 or 1935, and they have period homes and cars and dress. And the reason why that is noteworthy or newsworthy is because it stands out so much against the rest of the modern world. I would argue if I live my life with everything from the 1960s, like clothing and cars, and people would just think it looks amazing.
Maybe not with, maybe, I mean, female clothing is definitely, would look more costumey.
Yes, and that's why I really stick with American menswear, specifically. But, think of the cars from the 60s, especially the late 60s.
It does stand out. I mean,
It stands out, but it's not as costume. If I saw someone driving down a Jaguar from the 1960s or an Aston Martin from the 1960s, I'm not going to think, oh, they're dressing up. I'm going to think, I really wish I had that.
Yeah, it's an interesting take. I think it would be, one could, look at the individual elements.
Oh, totally. I mean, even like I did a whole paper on watch design and specifically watches of World War I. I don't know if you know about trench watches and how they were essentially just pocket watches that had little lugs soldered onto them. And then they had the cases were kind of cut out so they would have a little protection. It was like a shrapnel shield for your wristwatch. Great, looks amazing, but very much of the time. Again, looking at kind of that 1960s era watches, I would definitely wear them and feel very formal and feel very put together wearing a watch like that without feeling costumey.
So is there any other thing you think is important when looking at a house style?
From the house or from a potential new client perspective? I'd say from the house style, from developing your own house, it's important to just really feel truly authentic. And by that I mean you are living and believe in what you're doing. It's so hard to just manufacture style that you don't like.
Yeah.
And so as much as I would love to produce 3-piece charcoal suits for city bankers in the 60s, that's not where I stand as an individual.
So where do you stand?
I like wearing things that are a little bit more casual. When I have business suits, I don't do a 2-button or a 1-button. I do a 3-roll 2. It just feels a bit softer. It feels a bit more me. I do the softer shoulders. Everything about my business suit and my house style, if you want one from me, like if you want a Matthew Gonzalez classic business suit, you would get a 3-roll 2 and like a charcoal herringbone, maybe a dark green lining on the inside, just to give that little bit of difference, but still kind of elegant and simple enough to not be too showy.
So considering the world is getting more casual, you're more a tailor for like the modern man.
I try to be.
Who doesn't want the traditional Savile Row look.
I think they want the classic Savile Row construction and the technique and the heritage of making, but might not necessarily want the structure and the formality that goes along with a lot of Savile Row suits.
So Matt, if you had to break it down, if there was, one thing that really helped you establish your house style, what was that?
So when I first branched out on my own, I was going through some old books I had in my house, and I saw an image that transformed my perspective on tailoring.
And what was that?
Really created what I call Anglo-American tailoring. And I actually brought a book in for you here.
Okay.
This is a book I got in New York many years ago called Remembering Jack. It's all about John F. Kennedy.
Yeah, bring it up here. Nice.
So
okay,
this
cool.
is an image of John F. Kennedy on, I believe, a campaign tour.
Yeah.
And you can see
putting the leg up.
Putting his leg up, his hand, wearing his sunglasses. And I thought, there is not a single element of that pose that is British. I could not imagine some aristocrat sitting like that, wearing a bespoke suit. And I thought, this is the foundation of my tailoring house.
Nice. So it seems to me like, it's more relaxed.
Absolutely. And it's what really made me start telling people that I create suits that are made for you to live in, not to be in. And that's really been a defining characteristic of my house style.
Oh, that's interesting. So basically what you're saying is, I want the suit to be part of your life.
Yeah.
I don't want you to feel like you have to fit into the suit.
Exactly. This is about you putting your hands in your pockets. It's about you finishing your day after work and just feeling comfortable enough to throw your jacket over the back of a chair for an hour while you just relax for a moment.
You're just sitting down on that park bench or wall, not thinking about that, it may not be the best for your fabric.
Yeah, there was a great story. I saw a friend that I had not seen in many years, and I met her daughter for the first time, and we were catching up. And the first thing I did, I was wearing a suit, and I knelt down onto the pavement to say hello. And my friend said, "Oh, you're wearing a suit," and I said, "Don't worry about it. That's not a big deal.
Yeah.
I want to have a nice moment, and then we can worry about anything else."
Of course, you also can make a new pair of pants.
Exactly. It's a suit that you can live your life in. That's what's so important.
Nice. Good. I mean, that's a good starting point.
Yeah.
That goes beyond the what is my gorge height and what is the size of my buttonhole, and is it a Milanese buttonhole? Like, that has nothing to do with that, but is really part of the house style.
Yeah. That's the emotional.
It's intangible.
Exactly. That's that emotional kind of connection you have with a style, and that's why I put it at the top of the list.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing that.
Oh, I'm so pleased I could. All right, thanks so much. Cheers.